My name's Patrick Terry, and I'm the CEO at the Columbus Council on World Affairs. It's such a delight to have each of you here today. We'll start with a quiz. Who is thrilled to see the sun? Raise your hands. All right, that's question number one. Question number two, who here is aging? Great, then you're in a great spot. This program is going to be so relevant to you. We do programs like this about every other month. March 29th, we'll have a program on China, trade and security in China. So mark your calendars for that. It's going to be another excellent program and one that will be really relevant. China will come up today as also in the conversation around aging. Let's move on to today's program, because this is an exciting topic and one that I think will create even more questions and curiosity for us. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Cardinal Health, Lisa Gutierrez, who also is a proud board member for the Columbus Council on World Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Lisa.
Thanks, Patrick. So, good afternoon. I'm really pleased to represent Cardinal Health and proud to serve as a board member for CCWA. We've been a proud mission partner of CCWA since 2009, when we launched the annual Global Health Program, really under Diane's leadership. And like Patrick said, we are going to miss Diane. She's really a big part of the head and heart of our program for corporate social responsibility at Cardinal Health. We share CCWA's mission to foster a community that is well informed about international issues as they affect the world, the nation, and our local region. So with global headquarters in Dublin, so just some numbers, Cardinal Health employs more than 6,500 Ohioans and 50,000 employees in over 50 countries. We've been proud members of the community for over 45 years, and we take seriously our role as a corporate partner. We share CCWA's belief that our community's differences are a precious resource, and that community partnerships and collaboration are critical to winning in a more diverse, complex, and exciting world. I can think of no group more central to this mission than the one that is at the heart of today's discussion, the world's largest aging population, those over 60. There's no way to have a discussion on healthcare without a parallel discussion on aging, whether it's our own, a friend, or that of a family member. We are the they. And if it's not impacting your life right now, it will. For me personally, as my father became older, he went from a vibrant, healthy 70-year-old to one who had 4 different illnesses, which ultimately led to us losing him last March at the age of 83. This, in turn, is affecting our family ecosystem as we find different ways of supporting my aging mom, while also living our lives in New Mexico, California, Nevada, and Ohio. In June of 2017, a comprehensive report released by Aarp, the Aging Readiness and Competitiveness report, examined how 12 countries around the world were preparing to face the challenges of this growing population. To help us shed more light on this report and the related issues, I'm so honored and excited to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Joan Roth, the National Board Chair of Aarp. Joan has worked as an executive, human resources consultant, and attorney with some great organizations, including William Mercer, Zurich Financial Services, and H&R Block. Beyond all this, though, Joan and I have something in common. She has a passion for international travel. And I thought, I'm at 30 countries, right? So I was kind of excited and puffy, and then I found out she's at 79. And she's going, her goal is to do 100 countries when she turns 100, by the time she turns 100 years old. So she's well on her way. And her other passion, which is making a difference in her Kansas City community with the Mid-Continent Council of Girl Scouts, Habitat for Humanity, and the Kansas City Red Cross. So please join me in welcoming Joan Roth as our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Lisa, for that great introduction. And as I told Lisa, I've got a few more years on her, so that that she'll, by the time she's my age, I'm sure you'll be at 79 or 80 countries too. And when I'm 100, then I'll come back and we'll talk, and I'll tell you which is the best country, and I'll show you my passport book. Again, I'm so privileged to be here, and this is a great gathering, and obviously with my passion for international travel in the international area, this just really dovetails or confluence of my passions and what's happening. I wanted to set the scene with you a bit on aging, and I believe Patrick asked the question, how many of you are aging? You do realize you started aging the moment you were born. And when I was at the Milken Institute in California, there was a gentleman from the UK who was the panel moderator, and he kept referring to aging as a disease. And I couldn't help it. I'm here with 300 people in the room, and I'd finally had it. And I said, no, it's not a disease. You started aging when you were born. And as we had discussions later on, the reason that he was calling aging a disease, and this talks a bit about how different countries approach these things, he said, the reason I call aging a disease is because in the UK, the only way you can get funding for anything is if it is designated a disease. So from his standpoint, by calling it a disease, he was being able to work through issues that he was very passionate about in a way that, to me, I took it as being you don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, I think as we go through the report, you'll see that different countries have different cultural issues and different cultural ways of thinking about things, all of which are very important for us. But first, let me set the stage with you a bit about what's happening in the United States. So every day, more than 10,000 people in the United States turn 65. And by 2050, nearly a quarter of our population will be over 65. And that will make the U.S. a super-aged society. Right now, we are an aged society. And an aged society is a society by UN definition that has more than 11% of its citizens 65 or above. A super-aged society is a country that has more than 21% of its citizens being 65 and above. So the other thing that's important to note is we will continue to become a super-aged society. After 2050, we'll continue to grow and become more and more aged. More than 100 people, the first person to live to be 125 has already been born today. That is how far technology has taken us. And we need to be prepared for that. My grandkids, who are 6 and 9, have a 60% chance of being 100. And I certainly intend to be 100 so I could get my 100 countries. But today, we want to talk about it from a global perspective. And so let's broaden the conversation. By 2050, 1 in 4 people living on this planet will be 65 plus. So that makes us a super-aged planet. And we need to really come to focus with that. Many people, wring their hands and say, wow, what are we going to do? But we at AARP look at this as a real opportunity. It's a challenge and it's an opportunity. What we call disrupt aging means that we really need to disrupt the way we talk about aging. We need to disrupt how we think about aging. We need to disrupt how we automatically have this culture of inherent ageism. We need to talk about the benefits, the opportunities, and how we make it through the next great demographic shift, because it is coming and we can't sleep our way through it. So as we begin to look at it from a planetary, the whole planet, and not just the United States, we had an overriding question. How do what we do in the United States, how does it compare with what the rest of the world is doing? Where can we find the nuggets of information? How do we take the best practices? And how do we see where we can help others in this process? So to answer this fundamental question of how do we deal with an aging planet, we collaborated with partners at Foreign Policy, and we did an initial study of 12 economies. These 12 economies include large economies, small economies, what are called high-income countries, and medium-income countries. The way we picked these was to look at those that had the highest economic value by regions. And the result of this was what Lisa referred to as our Aging, Readiness, and Competitiveness Report, or we call it Aarp. This report paints a picture of how these countries are doing in relationship to each other and what we can learn about each other and best practices. The 12 economies that we studied included the United States, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Japan, Korea, China, Germany, the United Kingdom, Turkey, Israel, and South Africa. Obviously, a very diverse group of countries. And the exciting thing is we've had such a great response to this report that we are, in fact, going to put out Aarp 2.0, and that's going to be out this spring. And in that, we're looking at another 10 countries, and we're going to look at countries that range in size from Australia to Singapore. So again, we will continue to add to the debate. One of the things when we talk about super-age countries and the information that's in here, Japan became a super-age country in 2006. So you will find that there's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is Japan and what they are doing. I mean, they've been forced to really look at this, and they have come up with some very exciting things that they're working on. They also have some major challenges. So we're going to look at that. Another country that is on the opposite end of the scale is South Africa. They have a relatively young country. They have only 5% of their population, which is 65 and over. Mexico is a relatively young country, and China is a relatively young country, but will escalate to that super age very, very quickly because of the demographics of the one-child policy. And again, as we talk about it with Patrick, as I'll bring out some of this, are what are the factors that really make a country go from, how quickly they go from aging to super-aged. So again, we'll talk about areas that we focused on in the report. Those were the areas of community and social infrastructure. We looked at it from productivity opportunity for people is ability to continue to work and to earn income after 50, 65, and how it affects the younger generation. We looked at healthcare and wellness, and that is an area that's incredibly important, as well as having much diversity throughout the countries of what different countries are doing. And the last was technological engagement, because we all know that technology is a big driver of where we go as a globe. And just to put the straight right now, people in my generation, because I am the aging generation, I'm 70, and so my generation was very technologically astute. We often think that we aren't. We are the generation that put the first person on the moon. We are the ones who first took the guts to put something into a microwave oven and eat it when it came out. We are the ones who did all of that kind of stuff. And so we think we looked at the first TVs and all of that. So we were very technologically astute, and we continue to be. It's just that there are some problems perhaps in how we train individuals, but we'll talk about that. And so we were also very interested in capturing innovations in the healthcare sphere. And because, in fact, in the healthcare sphere, a very critical issue is the difference between longevity and your healthy life. And what we found out in our study is a great difference among these countries and among all the countries on the globe on that, that healthy age versus longevity. In the United States, it's 5.7 years. And what's happening is the longevity, how long we're living, is growing much faster than our healthy age longevity. So what that means is we have a bigger period of time in which we're needing more health care, in which we're needing long-term care, and wherever, and you're just needing more help from people. And that creates more costs, and it also means that we have to rethink our economic, how we do things economically. And from a United States standpoint, at 5.7, the United States has a higher or a longer health gap than the median or and the average of all the other countries. So that's something that we should not be proud of. So we also discovered that every country we looked at is facing some dramatic cultural changes, urbanization, in Japan, China, Mexico, that affects the aging population. We also learned that whether you're a high income or a medium income country, those economies need to recognize the value and potential contribution of older adults when it comes to engaging in the community, volunteering, combating social isolation and loneliness, and leading healthier lives, again, to help on that health gap. Very, very important, because loneliness is a critical issue that we'll also be talking about. We also found nuggets of innovation in virtually every economy, and we'll talk about some of that. But for example, Turkey's Caregiver Service Program subsidizes family caregivers who leave their jobs for a loved one to take care of people at home. Israel has a Here We Live program that is looked at to help in isolation and loneliness. And in this program, Here We Live program connects students who need housing with older individuals who have a room to spare. So by spending 5 hours, at least 5 hours a week with the individual that they are living with and interacting, then they get the free room and board. What is happening is that they find it becomes much more than 5 hours because there's this connectivity. So another thing we found out was the ability of economies to capitalize on the opportunities of the aging society and to look at the different challenges, and that it will require buy-in from many, many people. It isn't just going to be one person doing it or one company. It requires a committed effort among government, NGOs, businesses, academia, and individuals. And we'll talk a bit about what we have as a Livable Communities from AARP, which really is, in effect, sort of a microcosm of all of the issues that are around the world. So the bottom line is that we want to disrupt aging, we need to disrupt aging, and that this aging environment is happening, and it is a blessing, and when aging is viewed as a win, we all win. So with that, we'll talk a little more detail. Thank you.
We tell our guests not to wear skirts, so your team, your prep team knew all about it.
Followed your own advice.
Yeah, yes, I did not choose to wear one either. So age happens. All right, I like that. What I want to remind people before I come and sit next to Joan is we count on your questions and your involvement. And the way we do that is by note cards on the table, and you write your question. If you are of the older generation and prefer technology, you can hashtag us on Twitter, hashtag ask CCWA, and we'll monitor that. Let me ask a question as I sit down. Then Joan, you can answer it. The first question I had is, so you've been to 79 countries?
Yes.
Wow. Have you been to all 12 of the countries in the study?
I have not been to Turkey, although I was scheduled to go to Turkey a couple of years ago, but because of the geopolitical environment, did not go. I have been to Hong Kong, but not China. And other than that, I've been to all of them. Yeah. Well, no, South Africa I've not, but I've been to a lot of the African countries. Mm-hmm.
And you've been to the U.S., obviously.
Frequently.
Frequently, okay. One of the things I wanted to ask, because you're in a unique position because you have this study that shows some hard data, but then you've also been in a lot of countries and obviously have experienced sort of qualitatively this thing called aging. And I'm curious, from your perspective, I'm assuming you've been to most of these before the report came out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so when you read the report and you saw some of the outcomes, did they line up with kind of how you saw aging just from your travels? Were there surprises that you said, wow, I never would have thought of that? I'm kind of curious with that non-scientific approach first.
That's a very interesting question. yes and no. I would say that what it helped to do is, again, know that culture has so much to do with what happens in any country. And each country has its own specific culture. I mean, no matter where you're traveling in your 39 countries, you can see that culture. And that culture comes from how you eat at a restaurant, how families gather. I remember one time in Italy, we were going for a nice lunch on Sunday afternoon. It was 3 hours later before we were done. But what was great is there was a family next to us, and they made it into a whole outing. I mean, it was an all afternoon. They would come and go, they would play, they'd come back in, and it was several generations. And again, that's a kind of economy where long-term care is going to be spent more at home. Kids are going to take care of their elders. So that kind of thing I think was very important. It's really the culture that's very important. And then again, the other thing that's very important in these countries is where they are in their economic going forward. Poorer countries, they know they have needs, but they have to start saying, which need am I going to do first? So they need to start planning to say, in an ideal world, when we have these issues, and it kind of goes to what we were talking about in livable communities, we make a plan for what we need and where we need to be. And then somebody asks, but how do you fund it? That's where you need some partnerships, but you also need to say, you have to have a plan so that you say, when I have the funds and when I can do something, this is what I'm going to do first. And to start putting one against the other to balance why one is more important than the other.
Thank you. And you mentioned investment and priorities, and I was thinking about one of the things that struck me from the report was and you can give some of the stats, but that in the US we spend a lot on healthcare, and that doesn't necessarily reflect commensurate increase, or positive side of results or healthcare outcomes. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, what we have in the United States, and somebody had asked me the other day, where do you see the United States as perhaps the laggard? Because we talk about leaders and status quo and laggards. And while the United States is a leader in many areas, in the healthcare area, they come in a little on the laggard side, according to, in relationship to the other 12 countries. While in effect we have done tremendous technology and getting us to be able to live longer, we still have, as I pointed out, a high health gap than the other countries. We also spend more money on health care than other countries and have lower outcomes. So again, it's a critical issue, and how do we go around that? And all the other countries, and I'm not going to get into the political pros and cons of this, have national health coverage, and we don't. So that's again a factor that many people look at.
Every one of the 12 or 11 has.
Yeah. Now again, when you look at the money that different countries can spend, they may have national health care, yet some of their health care is not as robust as it should be. And there the issue becomes the ability of somebody to get from their house, which is a whole nother structural issue, to get from their house to, in fact, to their primary care physician. And in some of the countries, they don't have the concept of a primary care physician is just now coming into the mainstream.
Got it. Great. Yeah, I remember one of our previous Global Health Summits was talking about how do you provide care to people that aren't within access to a professional medical person, and so they started training people that were going out in the field as counselors, and whoever is basically there, train them to be a little bit more savvy on health instead of trying to get folks to the doctors in the cities. I think it might have been China because they're trying to get people out of the cities.
They're also doing a lot of telehealth. And in some of the areas, and I think China is a leader in this too, in the telehealth area, that they recognize that it is difficult for people to get into, to maybe go an hour, 2 hours to a doctor because it's that far to get to a doctor, that they have made sort of telehealth centers. So in effect, they have a center where people are able to give advice and look at it, and then you dial in to do your telehealth to this center. So what you have are many people in various disciplines who can work together. And then if you do need to get there, you can do it because it's closer.
And please, I didn't mention earlier, but just raise your hand when you have something written on your note card, and someone from our team will come around and feed these to me. I'll just go ahead and pick this one here and see if this one works for you, Joan. What countries provide very good public transportation systems that can benefit seniors in urban, rural areas?
None of them yet. They are working on it. And again, one of the critical issues are, while you think of a transportation system, transportation from where to where. Some of the countries have very good transportation systems if you can get down to the train or if you can get to the public transportation. And very good to get you somewhere else. So the critical issue is now when I'm at where I want to be, can I get from there to the doctor, the grocery store, et cetera? What many countries are doing, and we're doing it here in the United States too to a certain extent, is we recognize that you need to put in ability for people to see better or hear better where they're going, where the train is stopping. This is one place where the United States, at least, is a leader in one area, and that is with the Americans with Disability Act that we enacted in, 1990, I think it was, to at least make public transportation accessible for those with disabilities. Now, where it falls short is that disability is defined as disability, and if not just inability to walk as fast because now you hear your trains coming on platform, if it's Harry Potter, platform 8, how do you get there on time before it's gone? Yeah. And how do I really know that when I'm on this, even when I'm like in the airport and you're on the train going back and forth, I'm always looking, where am I? Where am I supposed to be getting up? So those kinds of issues are not really addressed by the Americans with Disability Act. Other things are the ability to make their trains so that, if you're in a wheelchair, you can get in and off of it. We have buses that will come down and you can get in and off, but the trouble is that not every bus is equipped that way. So those are the transportation issues.
I was thinking too about a friend who had, they had to ask their father to, not drive anymore, take the keys. As self-driving cars become more around or more acceptable and out there, is that an opportunity for the older generation to get out more and not have to worry about that?
Yes, I mean, some people think that's a real answer. And I was out in California quite a few years ago and got to experience the Google car.
How was it?
Well, it was kind of spooky,
yeah.
but when you look at it, it's got all these things on the top and all over. You obviously when you're on this highway, this is not a normal car.
Were you in the front seat?
Well, I had to be in the back seat. Oh. They were, I was not Google certified. So anyway, but again, it was looking at it. But when you look at it from a standpoint of access and cars, another thing that's going to be very helpful is the sharing economy, like Uber and Lyft. So what you see in Uber and Lyft, they have in fact started programs to say we are going to make it more friendly and easier for older individuals to be able to access our services without having to put an app on your phone. So from that standpoint, they're making it so that you can call in, and I'm not 100% sure yet how it works. But what this allows it is also for people who may be caregivers or a son or daughter who knows his or her mother or father needs to be at a doctor or somewhere, or even a social event, that they can make sure that Uber takes them or Lyft takes them to that. What it doesn't do, and this goes back to the transportation issue that I talked about, and that's the interconnectivity. I may have a car out there, but if I cannot get from my front door to the car because it's a crumbling infrastructure, then it is a cog in that wheel.
Yeah, good. Great, we're getting a lot of questions, this is good.
Right.
I'm gonna try to organize them. Let's go with this one because I remember in the report the gender. So women are more likely to live longer and also live in poverty was what I remember from the report. And this question is, we all know women tend to live longer than men. Okay, great. What particular challenges will be facing women as they outlive men? And maybe I could add to that, like, do you see, talk to us about gender across these countries.
Yeah, one of the things about gender that I think is important in this report that doesn't get pointed out, because there's a lot on gender and, the issues with women living longer, being paid less, and having less retirement income, et cetera, et cetera. So the important thing we need to think about is not so much how do you save for retirement, but how do you finance this longer life? And when you look at that and across the different countries, what has happened in every country, they recognize that the way to a better economic viability for the country and more competitiveness is to have more people working. They're facing a shortage of workers, just like in the United States, to fill some very critical jobs. And as people continue to roll off through voluntary retirement or what they deem to be forced retirement by their organizations, and as we have lower birth rates, we have a smaller and smaller workforce. What has happened is almost every country has tried to address this, and this is where it's very important to have partnerships. They have tried to address it through their pension system. So in many of these countries, they have women retirement for women at 55, men at 60. So again, right there, you've got that that gender issue in there that leads to the inequality down the line. So what many of them are doing is raising that retirement age under the pension systems. They're doing it from a standpoint of, I think, from a fiscal standpoint, but also they feel that this will bring people back into the workforce. What it has not done, and this is why I think of balancing one or the other, that's like taking one aspect and doing one lever, but not giving the opportunity, which is the workforce area, the opportunity to come back into the workforce at the same amount of dollars or continue to be productive. So companies are looking at that, and different countries are adding policies to really look at how do you do maybe a phased retirement, how do you bring back people, how do you do re-entry, how do you do retooling. And so that's something that's going to be very, very important. And in the United States, it's something we as different employers really need to look at. It's something that the human resource individuals really need to take under their wing.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Manpower report that talked about 40% of American companies struggling to fill their talent gaps. And me having a conversation with our board member from Honda who's saying the same thing. Is there an opportunity here with, and how are there some specific ways that other countries are leveraging this aging population as a resource to help that gap?
There's super opportunity. And a couple of the countries, again, as we were talking about Turkey, they do a fact that we are in effect going to give subsidies for people who go in to help in long-term care, as be caregivers. And what they're doing is subsidizing the person who's doing home care or long-term care, and they're subsidizing at a very low level, but it's generally like half of the minimum wage. But what happens is that they are in fact helping, and it's generally women with some sort of a stipend. But what that does, it helps that family a little bit, but it also keeps it from other women who are in the workforce who often have to come out of the workforce to be caregivers. So it helps keep them into the workforce. Other country is, and I can't remember which country it is exactly, they are doing a national, bringing people into universities to help them retool if they are interested. One is doing it for 4 years, which to me seems like a long period of time, but at least it's a start. With the idea that now we are re-educating people, helping them to get back into the workforce. And every country, including the United States, we have our CSEP program, where they look at how do we help lower income, is usually what it is, and a very limited group, how do we help them learn maybe some of the skills they need and then help them get work in the workforce? But that is a very limited area, and it's generally low income. It doesn't help with those individuals who are, in Honda that you're needing.
Got it. Good.
So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. I want to ask this, I want to sort of change this to more of a policy level question. As our society ages, we respond by increasing spending and investment on seniors and aging populations. How has that impacted spending on youth and education investments, and how are other countries addressing this natural tension?
First of all, I'm going to disagree a little bit with the premise which is the premise that we are, that the older generation is sort of the takers and not the givers. When you recognize that, out of 111 million people who are 60 plus in the United States, and they spend and have an economy of $7.6 trillion a year. Wow. That was an economy, if you look at it as a separate country, that would be an economy that is third largest in the world, just behind the United States and China. And people don't think about it from that standpoint. That's how you think disrupt aging. I mean, this group is basically contributing a tremendous economic amount. And to the extent you continue to have individuals stay in the workforce, they continue to make more money, they continue to spend more, and the economy goes up, up, up. Now, and also, when you have more productivity, that also opens more jobs for everybody, regardless of age.
This question is right related to that, and thank you for this person with such superb, clear handwriting. How will the economy be able to support the aging population plus the new workforce, assuming that people will have to stay in the workforce longer?
That is where, this I'm going to say, let's look at the data. We're having two issues here. If we can keep everybody working and more people working and we get stronger economies, et cetera, we will continue to need more workers. So if we say, take Honda, as you were referring to, and having problems filling people on the assembly lines, et cetera, you're going to have more openings, and we're going to have more people designing products across the board with new products, new technology, more and more jobs. So that is one aspect. And the other is, again, how do we as a society, because this is a major sea change, how do we think about how we're going to finance our retirement when we eventually decide to retire or to take a sabbatical? And because I think what will happen is we're just going to have sabbaticals throughout. So your sabbatical becomes every 7 or 8 years, and then you're gone for a couple of years and you come back. But it's to change the thinking to, how am I going to live on Social Security and my pension, because most people don't, pension plans in big corporations are out the window. It's 401k plans, so you're saving yourself. And so the fact is, how do I now finance my longer longevity? And that is going to be the issue, which eventually comes back to either saving throughout life, or if I'm a millennial, it's thinking, how am I going to position myself to continue to work? Because if I'm a millennial and recognize I'm not going to live to be 100, the individuals that I'm concerned about, as you talk about taking my job, they're eventually going to be gone, and I'm going to be outliving everybody. And then they have to figure out how to deal with people who are under them.
Yeah, I think I sort of think entrepreneurial all the time. I'm always thinking of new like business opportunities. I think about watching my dad. He sort of just got onto the iPhone thing, and he's so I get all these pocket dials, butt dials. Oh, Dad, and he's like, you don't hear anything. So you're obviously they're pocket dial. And I'm like, Dad, what's going on? He's like, I don't know. Every time I pull up, it's the iPhone for the first time. Every time I pull up contacts, it just dials them. And I was like, yeah.
Don't touch.
Don't touch the, So this whole idea of touching and, and as you get older, and I feel it's not as easy to, do that. So I think about market opportunities.
Yeah.
Are there some technologies that maybe aren't right on the tip of we don't know about that are big winners and we should make investments in?
Well, if I knew that, I'd probably be going to the bank right now to take out a loan and invest in it. But the area you're talking about, I think, is the fact that too many young people are designing products for older people. So they don't understand what it is. They don't understand the fact that now that I have this iPhone, I'm used to working a microwave, that I know I push this, and that if I make a mistake, I just hit re-enter. And so from some of the technology, and I'll grant you, I've got about every device that exists, but my teacher has generally been my 9-year-old grandson, who just kind of goes through here, and I say, Connor, how do you know how to do these games? Because I've got, my iPhone has games out the wazoo on them. And I said, how do you do it? He said, I just try it out. I said, that's okay. And so that's a confidence factor that many of us who are, older do not have that confidence to just try it out. And you find out what works and what doesn't. But an aspect of that also is all of the fraud that's out there. So many people are fearful. So it's a combination of the fear factor and the learning factor. So now back to the thing on, if you have 18 to 22-year-olds designing products, that doesn't necessarily work for what you're trying to do. And so MIT Age Lab, which we partner with, AARP does, really focuses on how do I design products for the older individual, and how do I train people who are, the younger people, to understand what it's like. What are they going through? And one of the things that they have designed is, it's really quite simple. They have a suit that has all kinds of bands and weights, etc., that you put on so that you now understand what it might be like to be 70, 75, 80 and have arthritis. And you also can now put on some goggles that, depending on what you're trying to look at, whether it's macular degeneration, whether it is, whether it's, all different kinds of things. And I was up there in September and I tried on all of these as well as the glasses, and I thought, if you really knew if this is how if these are the problems somebody is having, it really helps you recognize, it is hard for your father to, first of all, say, how do I keep from butt dialing, as you stated. And I've had people butt dial me for a lot of cases.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was his term.
That was, someone told that one to me. So let's go with this one. This is kind of related to the business of AARP. How can AARP help or support local organizations with projects involving the 65 and above demographics?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that AARP is doing, and we've taken a lot of pride in this, and we put in a lot of resources. Oh, see, you just called yourself.
It said what price? Oh my gosh.
Maybe we should figure them out for you. I don't know. Anyway. Okay,
Siri, take over moderating for me.
Yeah, Siri and Google Home and all that. Yeah, it's really quite amazing. So anyway, AARP is taking the lead and partnering with the World Health Organization on infrastructure and livable communities. And the World Health Organization throughout the world has, looking at, as you look at the report, recognizes that infrastructure, sociability, ability to, health, awareness, how to get somewhere, that a community has to be healthy. They have 8 domains that they look at for an age-friendly community, which a lot of the countries are looking at. In the United States, AARP is the sole partner with the World Health Organization on what we call livable communities. And in that livable communities, we have 200 livable communities throughout the United States. People have signed up to be livable communities. And it covers 60 million people. Wow. Columbus is one of those. Now, Columbus has just gone from its planning phase, which took about 3 years, and they have just gone from that phase and are now going to implementation. And what's interesting about it too is, as you look about how they did it, and AARP Ohio has worked with them along the way, the city council in effect, spearheaded the project. They had input from over 1,000 people, young and older, and they recognized that Columbus is also a very young city, so it has a younger population, an older population, and they brought them together to work. What is good for you is good for me, and how do we really make the best use of all of our talents? So now, in going from planning to implementation, the implementation phase is being taken over by Ohio State University, and they will continue in relationship with AARP to make those changes. There are 5 other cities in Ohio that are livable cities and working on it, and there are different states of development. So those are kind of
But
things
we're the
that are out
best
there.
one, right? In Ohio. Yeah, yeah.
I
There's no
I'm
comment.
sure.
There's several people in here who are working on the age-friendly Columbus, and Katie White and Nancy. And you raise your hand, would you? And so if people can see them and go to them and say, "Thanks for making this region more age-friendly, please," and thanks for being here.
Katie is the
Yeah,
lead
she's
on
the
it, isn't she?
she's the anchor. The one thing you mentioned that struck me, because I think about it more with my kids who are younger and all technology, this idea of like being connected but being isolated at the same time. It's a social isolation. You know, I think I worry about my dad sometimes like falling and all that, and there's a lot of technology that can like watch him and, you know, that alert and all that kind of stuff. Help, I've fallen and can't get up. But around the social isolation piece, can you talk a little bit more about what was in the report that
Yes.
might help us learn more?
Social isolation and loneliness are big issues. And loneliness leads to depression. It also leads to that lower health age, which, you know, increases the difference, you know, between your healthy age and your actual longevity. So why is it a real issue? You know, you would think in today's environment, it's very easy for people to go in and talk with others, but everybody gets so busy, they don't necessarily, you know, look at their neighbors. I guess I would question each of you as to, you know, do you really know what your neighbors are doing? You know, you see each other when you take the garbage cans out, and that's about it. But in other countries, let's say Japan and China, again, and Mexico to a certain extent, what's happening is urbanization. So in urbanization, individuals, the young people are leaving the rural areas to go into the city. And what that does, especially with lower birth rates, it leaves the individuals in the rural areas, the mother and dad, alone. So when they're alone and they're in a rural community which doesn't have as many people and everyone else is alone and older, it becomes difficult to really have that socialization, and that loneliness sets in. Now, what has happened in Japan, very interesting, and it's in the report. In Japan, they recognize this as a very critical issue, and so they have done a policy, and I think they made it a law. The question is, how do you actually enforce it? Yeah, is that you have to check in on your parents at least once a month.
What?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's almost like that puts it's almost like that puts a floor level that that means you're good or bad at it. So those are the kind, and that goes into the loneliness. Now, the other thing on loneliness in Japan, and this is why it's a very critical issue or social issue, they have, and I don't know, I cannot pronounce the Japanese term for it, but it translates to fear of solitary death. And that fear of solitary death is because like 1 out of 5 people who are 65 and older are living by themselves, and they are afraid that they will die alone and that nobody will find them. And in fact, I think it was a couple of years ago in Tokyo, 2,800 people died the solitary death. So it's this recognition this is a critical issue. And the other thing is in UK, which is a super aged country, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, just came out with an announcement last week, and where she announced that they had come up with this new initiative, and it is loneliness. It is to basically study loneliness. And she appointed a minister of loneliness. I think there's a little more bigger title, but it's basically Minister of Loneliness.
They're off on their own.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That would be Minister of Loneliness.
Sorry.
But yeah, right.
That's a good point.
But anyway, so in this, and why are they doing this? They are doing this because they recognize that, again, the same issue as Japan, China, and what we know in the United States in a lot of cases, that people are not having human contact. And in UK, they had identified 200,000 people in the UK who did not have human contact more than once a month. So they're recognizing, again, this is a huge issue. To me, it boggles my imagination, but that is the way it is. And so their first goal, other than to identify and appoint the Minister of Loneliness, is to study the whole issue very carefully, to figure out the drivers, what can be done, how do we bring organizations together, how do we bring, then, you may have an ability of somewhere to go, but how do you get people there? How do you, again, convince people that, yeah, it's okay to come out of my house and go see people? And they're supposed to have that study done in 18 months.
Got it, thank you. So I'll take the last question here from myself. Say I become president. I say,
President of United
pick your
States?
country.
Okay.
I don't want to get political. And I say, Joan, I'd really like you to be the Minister of Hope. UK, you got this Minister of Loneliness, and wow, that's a negative. I want it to be hope. What from the report or from your experience working in the aging field and as board chair of Aarp, what gives you hope about the future?
Well, first of all, if you were to appoint me Minister of Hope, I would say thank you, thank you, thank you. It's very neat. A lot gives me hope. Hope that when we talk about the longevity economy, look at everyone who is here talking and thinking about it. People are starting to think about it differently. And as we get the word out more and more, as people talk about it, there's so many opportunities. And I have a lot of hope that the younger generation is stepping up to the challenge, and how do we design products that not only help the older generation, but help them as well. That the economy will continue to go extremely well because we're including everybody into the working environment. That long-term care gets figured out. And one of the best ways to get long-term care figured out is to close that gap on the health age, the healthy age and the longevity. So I have a lot of hope.
Great. Awesome.
It's going to take a lot of people working together to get it, but there's hope.
Mm-hmm. There's hope. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's program, and please join me in thanking Ms. Roth for her time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We had one question that said, how do I access the report? You can go on our website, columbusworldaffairs.org, and you can get it there. We'll also be sending you a follow-up email with it included. We'll also send you a link to the Ann Fisher show. Joan was on about an hour ago with Ann Fisher talking more, and then our video will be up on our website in a couple of days if you want to re-watch Joan at a later time. Please consider coming back and seeing us again on the topic of China in March. And of course, we welcome you all to become a member and donor of Columbus Council on World Affairs. In your packet, there's handouts. And last but not least, May 3rd, International Award Ceremony. Not only will you be there to honor Columbus 2020, who is our 2018 International Organization of the Year, but you'll be there to see about 120 graduating global scholars, eager, hopeful, bright-eyed high school students who have completed their 3-year credentials. So until then, we are adjourned, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.